Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar organized by SGInnovate in partnership with A-Star and StartCentral. My name is Ziki, and I'm the head of community and brand here at SGInnovate. I'm sure most of you know who SGInnovate is, but for those of you who do not, we are a Singapore government-owned organization, and we work with scientist entrepreneurs to build, grow, and scale their deep tech startups from Singapore. We do this by investing in deep tech startups, in developing talent and matching them with our startups, and building communities where people from across the ecosystem can connect, share knowledge, and network. At SGInnovate, we firmly believe in the promise of deep tech, that it has the potential to impact humanity in very positive ways. And it's because of this belief that we recently launched our Deep Tech for Good initiative, where we aim to catalyze collaborations among corporates, startups, and governments to advance deep tech developments for social and economic good. We're very proud and thankful to have A-Star and StartCentral as one of our ecosystem partners for the Deep Tech for Good initiative. And together, we are embarking on a series of events to bring people together to discuss on various topics. Today is the very first of the series. We're very happy to see that so many people have joined us. I think we're close to 400 now, and we hope to get over 500. People are still streaming in. And I'm very, very glad to have esteemed panelists, Lim Ji, our CEO from SGInnovate, Professor Tan Zui, Assistant Chief Executive of Enterprise at A-Star, and moderating the session will be Dr. Basil Lui, Senior Vice President from EDB Investments. We're going to be talking about what it takes to grow Singapore's deep tech scene, the opportunities and challenges as Singapore transforms into a strong global deep tech hub. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And we also have a huge sign up. We always want to know where people are attending from. I see that we've got folks from Saudi Arabia, from Melbourne. Do send a shout out. Tell us where you're from in the chat function. And the chat box is also very, very useful in connecting with fellow attendees here. Share your contact details. While we miss the face-to-face, this is a great function for us to be connected with each other. And please, let's keep the session interactive as well, and do post your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A box for the speakers. Again, I would like to thank A-Star and StartCentral for this partnership. And before we start the session, I would like to invite Eugene Wee, Senior Vice President and Managing Director from Accelerate. Eugene, please.
Thank you very much, Ziki. And of course, thank you very much to SGInnovate as well. I must say, I need to thank you guys for setting this up, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of our participants to the promise of deep tech. As Ziki has mentioned, we are really proud, we are really honored to have Ziwi and Joy, who are really veterans in deep tech, come and speak to us this afternoon. And we also privileged to have Basil from EDBI, a Singapore-based global investor that really selects high growth technology sectors to invest in. So we're really proud to have him on board. For those who are unfamiliar with A-Star and StartCentral in particular, I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do before we jump straight in. StartCentral is an open innovation platform by A-Star, the Agency for Science, Technology and Research. Now, of course, everyone's familiar with the 5,200 researchers that we have at A-Star and the broad span of capabilities. But what we do at StartCentral really is focus on incubating and accelerating the growth of deep tech startups. And we also hope to bolster the startup ecosystem with the help of partners such as SGInnovate. Now, what we also do is we foster the interaction between researchers, our deep tech startups, corporates, investors, and entrepreneurs across a wide range of disciplines. So I encourage you to reach out and engage with us. You've got our contact details. If you don't, please feel free to key it into the chat box below and we'll respond to it as soon as we can. Without further ado, I shan't belabor this anymore. I see we are slowly inching towards the 500 participants from the over 1,000 registered. So I'll hand it over to Basil. Now, Dr. Basil Lui is the Senior Vice President and Head of Emerging Tech and Value Creation at EDB Investments. Basil, please.
Hey, thanks, Eugene. Right, hold on. Let me just make sure that I'm unmuted. Yes, I am. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for SGInnovate and ASTA for organizing this, and really privileged to be the moderator. I have the privilege of heading up emerging tech in EDBI. So the I stands for the investment arms of the Economic Development Board of Singapore. And so it's really fun to look into all things deep tech, frontier tech, hard tech. So, and what better than to have our two speakers here today, Dr. Lim Jui, the CEO of SGInnovate. He leads this August organization that's committed to helping scientists to have that entrepreneurial flair to build up and scale up deep tech startups. So, Jui and his team, they work closely with a wide range of partners and co-investors like EDBI to back up his unique group of founders who are looking to solve global challenges with their research-based solutions. And this is done through equity-based investments, access to the deep tech ecosystem, and talent network by providing business building support. And this is also where A-Star comes in. And Professor Tan Ziwi, he's now the current assistant CEO of the enterprise division. And this comprises of the industry development group and accelerate technologies, which Eugene is from. And Ziwi would lead the steering of the efforts, to translate all this amazing A-Stars deep tech R&D to market, so as to enable the the research field economic and social impact. So without much further ado, of course, our two speakers have accolades that when you list them, they go for a mile. So if you can just look at their speaker bios and you can see that they do have quite a lot of achievements behind them. So without much further ado, maybe I'll pose my first question to Ziwi on about A-Star and the Singapore ecosystem. How the organization is utilizing its strengths to get companies, deep tech companies, to start from Singapore and think global immediately. So over to you, Ziwi.
Well, thank you so much, Basil, and also to Joy as well as Ziki and SGInnovate. It's a pleasure to join this particularly exciting sector, because we do see that even today with the overhang of COVID is driving a lot of innovation in warp speed, just to take the code name from another country, in how we want to bring solutions to solve the problems we're all facing. Maybe as a start, I can request my slides to be pulled up. And this is a few slides that we felt to be useful to introduce Singapore to our audience who may come from different parts of the world. I'm looking at chat group. We have groups from Europe and even from South Africa. Welcome to this time zone. As the next slide, please. What A-Star is we are the national R&D organization under the Ministry of Trade and Industry to support science and development of technologies that will bring out economic as well as social impact. And we are one of the global science and technology organization, very similar to similar organizations such as Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany, CSIRO in Australia. And our role is really acting as the intermediate between public R&D as well as private sector. We support not just through the research that we do, but we also facilitate public-private partnership as well. Next slide, please. Under the Singapore R&D ecosystem, the government commits about 1% of our GDP to public R&D. And we hope that over the time, and we've been doing this for close to about coming to now almost 29 years since the 90s, that we want to use this to further support the ecosystem to be a vibrant one of leveraging of science and tech. And this is important because under Prime Minister's office, we really want to have science and tech driving our future growth. And within the ecosystem, this may be a crowded slide, but it shows that how the ecosystem works very closely together through the academic community, through the Ministry of Education. And this brings the universities in. A-Star through the Trade and Industry Ministry brings in other firefighting agencies such as Economic Development Board, of which Basel's EDBI is part of that unit, and also Enterprise Singapore, which helps the enterprise from Singapore to expand. And we work very closely with the Health Ministry through National Medical Research Council and the Academic Medical Centers. And then that will also link up with National Research Foundation, and all of us will interface with the industry through multinationals, large local enterprise, small medium businesses, as well as startup within Singapore and internationally as well. Next. And when we operate, we tend to try to organize ourselves based on the outcomes where the market will actually pull many of the tech that goes across. And if you look at the way in which we align ourselves to markets, this is kind of organized in what we call the technology domains that you can see from the left to the right. From the left, we basically have the advanced manufacturing and engineering domain, which is really to support the manufacturing sector, which contributes about a fifth to the Singapore economy. And how do we keep us competitive manufacturing going ahead, leveraging on the advanced manufacturing processes, Industry 4.0, IoT, and new materials. In the health and biomedical sciences, it's really about advancing health and human wellness to the Asian phenotype and understanding how new therapies, new diagnostics, and medical device can be developed for the Asian population. As Singapore is a small country and we import most of our resources, we have to think about sustainability as well as urban solution. So we have a domain that looks at land, energy, and water, and this is under urban solution and sustainability. Going forward, carbon footprint is also very important for our future development as a society and a country as well. And lastly, of course, you heard a lot about Smart Nation, and this is really under the services and digital economy, where it's really trying to create capabilities that can develop new innovation and capabilities that not just grow the ICT sector, but also support the previous three domains I talked about. Undergirding the verticals are the horizontals, which really, if you think about development from R&D to technology to outcome, you really need to have good academic research. You also need to have a strong manpower program to find ways in which you can cultivate talent, researchers, innovation fellows, as well as technopreneurs. And lastly, all of us in this group here are also part of the innovation and enterprise ecosystem. And what we hope to continue to do, and also create a lot more platforms to be able to allow many of you on the audience to actually interface with us going forward. Next. So some examples that has come out from the Singapore ecosystem, just list two in the AI digital space. On the left is a local company known as Neometrics, and they were founded about 10 years ago. And their role is to try to help companies be able to better position themselves to the audience where they are searching for data on the B2B space. They have been growing very well, very strongly over 3 continents, and just recently completed a pre-Series C funding round last year. Then on the right is Neometrics, also started about 8 years ago, really looking at technology stack that is looking at analytics of the networks itself. This really amazing company by Costas has grown very fast, over 30% annually for the past few years, and their revenue stream actually is very exciting. I'm very proud of them being where they are today. Next slide. On the other side of the spectrum is also the biotech scene, and I just want to shout out to 2 local companies, Carmine Therapeutics, which I think in the news just a few weeks ago was very significant that even at a very early stage, they have managed to strike a very significant licensing deal with Takeda to commercialize and partner on therapies for rare diseases. And I think this is a testament to our biotech scene, which is a byproduct of the investment in the biomedical research. And besides Carmine, there's also Lion TCR, which is also developing T-cell receptor therapy against viral infection and cancer. And they just also concluded a Series A financing round in 2018. Next slide, please. To help many of this deep tech, we really believe that from the ecosystem side, there is a role for the government to step in to create translation platforms, and that will help companies to navigate not just the developmental space, the regulatory space, the clinical space, and even the market space. So two examples, one is on the life science, and this is really the National Diagnostic Development Hub, or DXD Hub, and they have been around for about past 5 years. One example of how they have helped is the local company Lucent Diagnostics, which has basically be able to commercialize a test that is able to detect tumor. And as a result of this, they have launched across a few countries. They have grown very rapidly with over 50 staff. And subsequently, as you know, you do well, you grow, your ability to raise subsequent funding is much higher as well. And I think also Lucent was in news in the last 2 months, as they also have stepped up their role in COVID-19 with diagnostics and also platforms that can help in the diagnostic process. Lastly, just before I end, is the next slide, please. It's also a similar example in the advanced manufacturing side, and this is really the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Center, which is the platform to support 3D printing at the Singapore level. And a shout out to this company, 3D Metal Forge, which has really been one of our promising local companies that have developed solutions for metal-based 3D printing. They have got many successful partnerships and revenues from marine and offshore companies, aerospace companies, precision engineering companies, and this is exciting aspects of manufacturing deep tech that we want to also share as well. So with that, I conclude my slides, but I give you a sense of the role that the Singapore government plays, and we work very closely with our sister agency and the ecosystem so that it is a really integrated pathway for all budding entrepreneurs and as well as companies as well. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Evie, for giving this amazing overview on what A-Star has done. And I really like the whole idea of, the 4 technology domains and cultivating and catalyzing capabilities, resulting in all these successful startups that you just mentioned. Maybe I'll ask Joey the same thing about SGInnovate and how, SGInnovate as an organization is utilizing its strengths, to get all these startups to start up from Singapore and think global. Joey, over to you.
Thanks, Basil. You've already provided a fairly good introduction to SGInnovate, but just to recap, we're a government-owned company, and quite frankly, that says a lot about how flexible our government is in thinking about advancing the agenda in deep tech. But we're a company that's focused. Our agenda is very simple: is to focus and develop the deep tech space. Now, what do we mean by deep tech? For us, deep tech is anything that's research-based, that has the potential to be IP, for its intellectual property to be protected, right? So these are niche areas, high entry barriers. And our long-term vision ultimately is to build an entrenched, a vibrant, and ultimately a respected deep tech economy, not just a space, but an economy. And reduced to practice, it comes down to a few things. It comes down to starting good companies, that create impact and value, and then for us to exit these companies, right? And also along the way to help these companies get good deals, like the ones you saw with Carmine in Zui's slides. Yeah. So our modus operandi is based on the trident of community development, talent development, and venture building / venture investment. Yeah, that at the end of the day, it comes down to that. And the focal point is the entrepreneurial scientist. Yeah. So events like today's, and while I'm at it, I just want to give a shout out for those of you who haven't registered. Next week we have, well, actually in a few days, we're going to have a chat between 2 of AI's giants, Yoshua Bengio and Li Kai-Fu. That's on Thursday morning. So events like these are curated, developed by the community team led by Ziki. And this is a way for us to build community that includes not just the scientists, but also the investors, the regulators, corporate partners. Yeah. And then from this group of people that we've engaged, we have a talent platform. The talent platform does two things. We try to find good jobs to match the skills of the people in our database with the needs of companies, especially those within our own portfolio. Yeah. And then finally, the tip of the spear really is the venture building, venture investment side, where it acts really as a catalyst in frontier areas, in those areas between bleeding edge and cutting edge. So just to give you an example, we've invested 50 million so far to date, and that has catalyzed private sector investments amounting to about 680 million. We focus on, so we were the first investors in quantum in Singapore, in space tech, in some of the early digital health companies, in some of the early AI companies. So to cut a long story short, that's what we do. We're end of the day, we're a catalyst. Yeah. And in the interest of time, I'll just end here.
Hey, Joey, I think
Yeah.
I'll continue with my line of questioning with you, because
Sure.
you mentioned about venture building.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give me your perspective. If venture building, a tip of the spear, is it a necessary but not sufficient condition to develop the deep tech scene in Singapore?
I think absolutely. Venture building, certainly in our context, we build. Okay, so when we say venture building, we're talking about projects that are still at the research institutes or the universities. Yeah. And these are companies that these are projects that if we feel are worthy of subsequent funding, we will take that effort and help them secure NRF central gap funding, right? So these are typically projects that have already achieved proof of concept. Now we are taking them to the next stage with central gap funding. At the end of central gap funding, these companies ought to be at TRL 5 or 6 and ready to receive venture capital. This process of de-risking, especially in some of the frontier areas, is essential because the private sector may not always want to take that degree of risk. Yeah. So to me, you're right. It's necessary but insufficient. Ultimately, there must be follow through, whether from SGI's investment fund or from other investment funds.
Got it. Thanks. Hey, ZV, maybe I could, continue with this line of questioning. Like, is Accelerate working in the area of venture building? Is A-Star planning to further develop companies from the R&D stage and move them on to TRL 5 and work with the VC private sector to help them grow?
Most definitely, we do see that there is a lot of good science that's coming up from the deep investment we have been investing over the past years, and it's not just within A-Star, but from the ecosystem and also from the universities as well as the academic medical centers. I think what we do recognize that as we want to create this deep tech startups, what is more importantly is to be able to help really on the market side to better get a sense of the market demand, the business model. And this is where I think working very closely with very large multinational presence in Singapore, and most of the global companies actually have some form of regional headquarter over HQ, and some of them actually have product R&D center as well. One of the ways in which we are trying to do a much better link up is to be able to link the supply to the demand. And so that at least, because the fact of life is that there is always this risk of not having a good idea, but in the first 2 years, a lot of things you realize didn't work, you didn't figure out upfront. And if we can actually solve many of this earlier, not just in the tech side through incubation, but also the market demand, the actual business model, this will help a lot because the Singapore market is actually very small. We all know that. But if we can help to link up with the channel owners, and many of them are in our ecosystem and linked across the world in Asia as well, I think this will help a bit. And therefore, the translation center that we have, such as Diagnostic Hub or even Neometrics, is just two examples of how we can actually bring the larger players into this ecosystem with their problem statement and therefore do the correct facilitation. And also, if there is a gap in terms of tech, the public sector agencies will come in with the R&D performance to then construct what is needed, to which the local companies or the startups can be primarily the receptacles to own the IP, to which they can actually develop the solutions to the end user companies as well. But besides just doing the innovation process right, I mentioned it earlier that we also want to get enough of this tech biz individuals, people who are bilingual, understanding science and understanding business. I think this is a very important area that we want to do better. Just, I guess, as a personal background, both Dre and myself, I think some of you may not know, we're both doctors, and we went on our entrepreneurship pathway. We got our own battle scars. But honestly, if we had mentors, okay, we have the correct ecosystem, even 20 years ago to 10 years ago, I think we would have done a lot of things faster and more efficiently than today. In fact, if you want to get an AI startup, you want to get a deep tech 3D printing companies up, you want to get a diagnostics hub, this is the right place to be, because we have not just got the support ecosystem, we have also the academic environment. We also have the regulatory environment that is very keen to facilitate this. We also have the market access through Singapore into the region. And I think this is what will be very important for us to attract more to come.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ziwi. And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned about battle scars. I mean, even for myself, I think more than 25 years ago, I was working on flat panel displays and organic light emitting displays. And only now that I see these rollable displays being commercialized. So which leads me to my next question. Maybe Drew, you can answer it, is why deep tech has this long gestation period, compared to all these software-centric startups that, venture capital firms love because, faster return, I guess. Yeah. And what's the advantage of Singapore investing in deep tech in the long run? How the deep tech infrastructure and ecosystem Singapore actually has already, it will further attract people and more companies to be based in Singapore, as compared to software startups where really you can kind of base yourself anywhere. Yeah.
Well, let me take the second half of the question first. I mean, I think whether we look at what's happened with the pandemic, and looking forward to a future without fossil fuels, a future in which space travel is possible, so that we can acquire additional resources, space. It's gonna require research. It's gonna require proof of principle. It's gonna require proof of concept. In some cases, and actually in most cases, when we talk about deep tech, I mean, whether we're talking about flying rockets to space or getting a new drug onto the market, there's gonna be a lot of testing, and there's gonna be the simultaneous development of standards, and then the requirement to meet those standards. And then, of course, in the case of in healthcare, then you actually go and you actually need to trial them in humans, right? So all these add up, and that's the reason why it takes so long. But quite honestly, from our venture building experience, even before we get to the stage where we can talk about standards and meeting those standards, I mean, the whole process of translating an idea to at least a physical product, that's, it's not so simple. I mean, from our experience, I mean, just doing venture building, right? We still lack, for instance, a central database, right? If you first of all, we don't have a complete ecosystem of people who can make everything in one shot. So let's say you have a diagnostic, or you have a medical device. Some people can do the extrusion molding, some can do the 3D printing, but they can't do the qualification. Others can do fluid handling. So part of our effort in venture building is not just to help so we actually get our hands dirty. So you might have seen in the broadcast earlier when Dr. Lin Lim was talking about her experience with us. I mean, we basically found the project leads, we found the engineering companies for her. We're taking her through the regulatory process. But as important as helping them, what we want to do at SGInnovate is also start building vertical communities so that we understand, all right, next time somebody needs to make something that looks like this, we now know who we can talk to about the regulations, about compliance, who can make what, and when do we need to turn overseas to get parts or supplies. So all these things, cause the gestation period to be so long, rather than to build upon, if you look at Airbnb, I mean, of course, there's a lot of innovation, but that's principally around business models. And of course, even with the technological innovations that they might have developed, they're still built upon a fairly well-established technological infrastructural base. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the second part of the question to Ziwi, I think Singapore has a lot going for it. It has invested a lot in all this deep tech infrastructure. It has pools of people, scholars. I mean, just going to A-Star, throw a coin and you hit someone with a PhD because everyone's a PhD there. So all the talent is there. So, it seems that it's just connecting the dots and telling the whole world that we have the deep tech infrastructure, we have the talent. It's just a question of connecting the dots and you have to come to Singapore, start your deep tech startup, and the world is your oyster because deep tech is global in nature. So maybe what are your views on it, Ziwi?
I agree that I think if you are definitely of the view that Asia is really growing, and this is really the opportunity itself. Singapore gives you a footprint that is able to capitalize on talent, capitalize on the respect of intellectual property, and you can actually even get some of your early business model validated in Singapore, and from there you project yourself into the rest of Asia. What we are, as what Dre has mentioned, trying to facilitate the various connection points so that if you are trying to develop a certain business model, and let's say I just use 3D printing as an example, and let's say you want to go into 3D printing for, let's say, construction, for example, we are very keen because in Asia, urban city is a big thing, and more cities are going to be built within China, India, and the rest of the emerging countries. But there are going to be ways in which we can build faster, more efficiently with technologies such as sensors, digitalization. And this is just another example that within Singapore, we are already creating a public-private partnership to try to bring in the state, which is also investing a lot in public infrastructure to create sandboxes for some of this new infrastructure that will also leverage technology. We are using this in the way we are constructing our new airport and our new ports, for example, although things are going to be slowed down a bit because of COVID. But many of this you can actually run through your test bed and running through the initial business model. And if you get it validated in Singapore, it gives you a lot of credibility when you project yourself out of Singapore into the region. And there are also many global companies that are also in Singapore looking for startups to which they can add into the portfolio or even acquire the services from. So I think this is where you have really the whole ecosystem working very closely. I just mentioned for construction, and I mentioned Dre talk about life sciences. The other area that deep tech is coming in very interestingly is, for example, in urban farming and Agri-Tech. And for example, we are using our dependency on imported foods, as a problem statement for us to think about, can we be self-sufficient for our nutrient needs in 2030 for 30%? And this is really a very interesting deep tech because it's about Agri-Tech, indoor urban farming, the way of different sensors in monitoring crop growth, the different ways of looking at lighting, the monitoring for nutrients content. And this is actually just another example of how we are bringing in engineering, AI, even biological sciences into a very interesting use case. So Singapore, we are creating many of these use case as sandbox, to which it creates opportunity that you can't find anywhere in the world.
Thanks Ziwi. And actually, when you say you can't find anywhere in the world, I mean, that leads me to my next question. Just wondering, have you seen successful deep tech ecosystems elsewhere that maybe Singapore can adopt or nurture these best practices?
You want me to start?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, yeah, Jui, please go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously there are a few hotspots lah. I mean, needless to say, in the US, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Silicon Valley, in Europe, I would say London, Munich, perhaps, Israel, in between Europe and Asia. And then, 10,000-pound gorilla is, of course, China, which has really, I mean, they've made such great strides, not just in what they're trying to do, but what they've actually done, and most critically in the whole mindset, right? I mean, the desire to be professional about this, to actually make good products. I mean, it's apparent in what's coming out from China today. I'm not sure we should follow any of these because circumstances are different. I forgot to mention in Europe, of course, Scandinavia, very, very productive. I mean, they like to tell me that on a per capita basis, they have more unicorns than any other ecosystem in the world, for instance, right? I mean, all of them have very interesting cultural characteristics. In the US, if I had to sum it up, I would say, hunger has been sublimated into cool, right? It's almost expected. I mean, even though people are wealthy, they haven't gone soft because it's become cool. If you go to Silicon Valley, they'll, and you haven't started a startup, then there's something wrong with you. Yeah. And then in Scandinavia, it's slightly different, right? I mean, when I talk to my friends from Scandinavia, they say maybe the welfare state had a role in it because, it provided a backstop, a minimum backstop, and that freed you, that liberated you to go try things. Yeah. So, and that's very different from, what we may think about a welfare state. Actually, it's something, it doesn't make people lazy necessarily, right? I mean, in the case of Scandinavia, it's liberated them. And then, of course, there's Israel. No need to say, that chutzpah is almost historical. I think being a conflict probably changes your worldview. What's important, what's not. Why, if not us, who? If not now, when? If not this, what? That kind of mindset. So on a cultural basis, I think each of them, and of course the UK, needless to say, I mean, again, if you look at the Nobel laureates, if you look at Cambridge and Oxford, the Nobel laureates per dollar spent on a per capita basis, probably as good as Israel. I mean, top notch, right? So, the question is, do we have these things? So we are totally different. So we need to find our own sublimation, our own solution. We have to find a way to provide our own backstop so that people don't feel like they cannot afford to be doing this. Yeah. So there are features that we can learn from, but clearly we can't adopt things lock, stock, and barrel.
Got it. Maybe this is a good segue into the question and answers, because I think I see a relevant question coming up. It's by Albert Sutino, and then maybe I'll just read it outright. There seems to be more deep tech VCs investing in software startups in Singapore. What's your view and plan to support more deep tech hardware startups? Maybe I'll ask Ziwi to address this question.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question because I think, as we all know, the time to the impact is definitely much faster for AI and software. And we've seen that being played out in the fintech side. However, I think that because in Singapore, two large ecosystems are driving a lot of demand for innovation. One, I would say, is life science. And in the life science, of course, we know the biotech has always been an important area of driving it. And now it's actually diagnostics. I think this too, with the demand from the ecosystem and also the underlying, for example, COVID situation, has driven a lot of interest into this space in the last, I would say, just 6 months that we've not seen. And I think this will continue at least for the next 2 years. On the manufacturing side, because Singapore is a major manufacturing hub, in case you didn't know, for example, in the area of electronics, for example, Singapore is one of the major players in the semicon space. Close to about 12 to 30% of wafers come out of Singapore. We also have strong companies such as semiconductor equipment makers such as Applied Materials, and also local companies such as AEM, which is in the testing side. Many of them are also investing into deep tech semicon startups as well. And we do have a number of very strong ones that have emerged over the last 2 years. And the opportunity, just to share in the manufacturing side, is that sectors such as electronics, even pharmaceutical manufacturing, even in aerospace, even though aerospace is currently going through a challenge, marine offshore are key sectors that operate out of Singapore. And they are also starting to even do local product charter as well. And with that in place, you have a very large channel owner who are here, and you can actually look at the B2B space to which your deep tech startup can actually be linked to. You can work very closely with EDB, Economic Development Board, ESG, together with even SGInnovate, EDBI, and A-Star to help you do the facilitation. And we run many of these platforms and program office to which we bring different players together. And in fact, some deep tech startups have done very well by ultimately becoming solution players to the big boys. One specific example I'll highlight is a program that we developed last year. This is really to support the fast-moving consumer goods company, Procter and Gamble, Nestle, Coca-Cola. These are three large global FMCG companies, and they are actually moving more into e-commerce. And because they move into e-commerce, they are moving towards much more personalized packaging and personalized products. And we worked together with them, and there was a program to develop solutioning to have hyper-personalized packaging. And this has helped to bring local companies who are in the area of system integration, even the materials in terms of packaging, even in terms of supply chain, to come in as part of this consortium, to which the off-takers are primarily the big companies and their plants in the rest of Asia. I think this will give you an example of how we've lowered the risk of the hurdle to markets for many of the deep tech startups, just as two examples. Thank you.
Hazel, can I just take a quick crack at that? Hi, Albert. I think I know who you are. So I just want to say that in our role as a catalyst, you know, in sort of the first phase, we looked at a lot of AI and IT-based companies, but we will be moving towards more hardware and wetware going ahead. Now, we're not going to have a lot of money. We're not a big fund, but if we intend to use our role as catalyst to bring other investors into Singapore to help. You're absolutely right. The hardware space is crying out for more capital. And we have good stuff. The stuff coming out of NAMIC, you know, some of the stuff in the energy space. I think our universities are all very, very well, highly ranked, and we intend to address that, Albert. So stay tuned.
Great. Maybe, Jui, you can continue staying on to answer the next question. Yeah. I think it comes from Ashish Kanija. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. But you're asking whether given that venture building is one of the intents of SGInnovate, right? So
Yeah.
and startups are well nurtured by them. What's the level of enterprise and corporate offtake? I mean, I basically I think you're asking about the commercialization vision and success coming out of venture building. Maybe I hand it to Jui to answer this.
Yeah, so I just want to qualify. I should just start by saying that venture building is a new activity at SGInnovate. Yeah, so actually at the current moment we are managing 3. That's it. So we're not doing big numbers, but we do them very, very intensively. So slightly different model from some of the other venture builders in our existing ecosystem. And the long and short of it is, we don't have a readout yet. And it's an interesting experiment. I mean, we're almost like the management team. We take over the intellectual. We actually take the license from the universities on behalf of the companies. Yeah,
Got it.
We find the leadership. We find the people who can make the stuff. So very, very engaged. So we'll see.
Yeah, Ziwi, you want to take a crack at it? Is Accelerate working on something like that?
Well, I would say that A-Star as a whole is stepping up in terms of new co-creation. Because we believe that we have the ability to be a bit more deliberate, and we work very closely with really in the space that we are strong in, which is in the area of life sciences. And just an example, the diagnostic hub has helped to catalyze new company growth. Of course, Lucent is one. The other one is Miraxis, that also have grown very well as mRNA company. I think that we really want to, as what Dre has said, we can't spread ourselves very thin, broadly. We have to be very sharp, because whatever we go in, we want to create best-in-class companies. And the only way this can happen is the best-of-class tech, the best-of-class people, and actually the channels that we can help them go in much faster and deliver as well on possibly on the B2B space.
Great, great. Actually, I think both of you are being modest in your efforts to build companies, because EDBI is actually a beneficiary of a common company that both of you helped build. It's called TransCelestial. And I believe, it was SGInnovate that venture built it. And guess what? The chief technology officer, nurtured his capabilities and his know-how from A-Star's IHPC scholarship, and learned all about the necessary technology to build up this company. And then that's where EDBI stepped in and led a growth stage round to further their growth from Singapore into the region. So this is all about laser optics, the next stage of 5G communications, and I think that they are a category leader. And I think more Singaporeans should sign up and join them if you guys have the chops and and want to learn all about 5G and can contribute to this leading local startup. So I think both Jui and Ziwi are just being modest about their organization's efforts. Yeah.
Well, technically, we didn't do the venture building for TransCelestial, but we were one of the first investors. At a time, so in a way we helped to break the deadlock, because many of the local funds weren't prepared to lead the deal. Yeah, so that's what we hope to do. Our ability, our confidence in our willingness to lead deals, hopefully will therefore draw other investors along with us. Yeah.
And thanks for breaking the deadlock, because that attracted both EDBI and Wavemaker.
That's right.
Well-known
Wavemaker,
private sector VC to co-lead the growth round, and we hope there are more of such deep tech companies, emerging both from A-Star and SGInnovate. That we depend on you for the pipeline, because as EDBI we are growth stage investors.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So let me just go down the list of questions and see. We have probably time for one or two more questions. So this is an interesting one. The younger generation, this is from Wayne Kidd. The younger generation, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that's a new one, would prefer to pursue their studies in popular courses such as medicine, law, business, rather than STEM-related courses for obvious reasons. So in your opinion, what do you think Singapore can do to encourage younger generation to pursue STEM-related courses so that there will be sufficient talent to support Singapore's pursuit of deep tech? Maybe Zivi, you take a crack at it. Yeah.
Well, I would say that it all starts with inspiring the young early, bringing role models to them as early in school, so that they do understand that STEM as a career has lots of prospects, not just in academia, but also in terms of research and also in entrepreneurship as well. Of course, you need to, we have a global audience here. We need to be very pragmatic that the Asian parents, unfortunately, is still quite favored upon for their children to be a professional. But I think that in the last 10 years, this is starting to change. We start to see a lot more of the younger kids getting involved in deep tech, even where they are in undergrads, which is a good thing, and we will have to continue to generate the awareness and generate the culture that risk-taking is actually acceptable, because in Asia, I think it is still quite frowned upon that if you fail once, it means that you're failed forever. But that's not the case with entrepreneurship. In fact, Jay and I have many battle scars, as I mentioned. My own background, I'm a clinician, public health. I went into corporate role. I did a startup. In fact, I also opened up a few other businesses before I exited them and came back to public sector. Likewise, Jay has a similar journey. But actually, again, I think that what we would actually find that now is about the best time you want to do any entrepreneurship, because the environment in Singapore has improved night and day versus where we were 20 years ago. There are a lot more support from the government. There are a lot more knowledgeable mentors. There is actually a better sense that it is it's okay to try it, especially when you're young. And in fact, your first attempt, you don't get it right, it's okay. You can reiterate again. Use your know-how and do it again and again. In fact, when I see business pitches, I actually want to understand if the individual has learned and actually learned from failure, so that they know what they need to do right the next time. And this is where we see many successful entrepreneurs. They may not get the first home run. It actually comes through after a few rounds. And I think this is a part of a larger cultural evolution that we are seeing in Asia. And especially in Singapore, I think we have a right place to do it.
Hey, Jay, how about some comments from you? You have an unusual path. You are actually a certified medical doctor, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, just like Zui, but in my case, I will shamelessly say I'm a failed entrepreneur. So I should be a good example, right? Just because I failed didn't stop me from getting another job. And I will say when I was in NTU, we had students who had failed in their startups and then went on to find jobs in GIC and Temasek. So it's not the death knell. Now, hopefully these guys will, after a few years in a big company, they'll venture out again. But Winkit, I just want to, this whole thing about STEM related courses is a very important one, because when I was at NTU, we also saw a lot of kids who went to engineering and then end up working in UOB or Goldman Sachs, right? So we trained them in STEM, but then they didn't take on STEM jobs. And, part of the problem is that a lot of engineering jobs fell behind the finance center, or even scientific jobs fell behind other sectors like finance. My former boss, Mr. Philip Yeo, famously said, if you just have a bachelor's, you'll only be washing test tubes. So, if you want to do STEM, I think you can't just stop with a basic degree. I think you do need to go further. And this is where deep tech is so important. More than this is where the impact of deep tech can be felt, because if we succeed in what we're doing in deep tech, we're going to create a new class of super interesting jobs, right? And that's going to change the equation. So it's not going to be on a production line in a semiconductor company, which can be pretty mindless. This is going to be new jobs, in a variety of spaces. So they are mutually reinforcing. But Winkit, I feel your pain. I do too. It's one of the things that you know, in my career, I've been looking at for quite a while. So I hope that answers your question. And please feel free to send me a, you know, if you want to continue the discussion, send a message to my teammates, and then we can be connected. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect concluding remark from Jui, you know, and thank you both, Ziwi and Jui, for your wisdom and knowledge. I mean, you guys have obviously gone through the whole career path, you know, all the battle scars, really impressive. And thanks for sharing your thoughts about, you know, Singapore's deep tech scene and how we can further enhance and improve on it. And you know, from what I'm hearing, you know, I myself having done engineering degrees and seeing, you know, how the startup scene has evolved over the years in Singapore, I think we are in good state. It's just a question of joining the dots and further strengthening all the linkages. I mean, you know, putting my hat on for EDB, over the last 50 years, we have attracted, you know, thousands of multinational corporations into Singapore. If any of these deep tech startups can provide the solution to the problem statements of all these multinational corporations, the scaling up will be enormous. So, you know, do consider that, you know, when you want to do a startup, come to Singapore. I think the ecosystem is here. A-Star and the whole of government, we have laid out the deep tech infrastructure. The talent is here. Do your STEM related courses, pursue your PhD, you know, be one of the many A-Star PhDs, you know, as well as achieving it in NTU, NUS. A shout out for all our, you know, universities out there producing top-notch talent. Yeah, and make this a thriving ecosystem, because I tell you, deep tech, you have to come into a thriving ecosystem, and I believe Singapore will be one of it. With that, I will end this session, and you know, thank you very much to both our speakers.
Thank you, Basil.
Thank you, Basil.
And thank you everyone for your questions.